call, please.
Yes, Mr. Chair. Committee Member Alejandro Gutierrez.
Here.
Committee Member Mike Jordan is absent, and Chair Friedman.
Here.
Great.
We do have a quorum, so we'll move on to item 2, preliminary matters, and I'll turn it over to Mr. Isaacson for any announcements.
Excuse me. Thank you, Chair Friedman. I believe our only announcement will be presented by Ellen Kokinda, Design Review Supervisor.
All right. Hello, good afternoon. Council members Gutierrez and Chair Friedman, just wanted to announce that as part of our land development team process updates, and as you're already aware, we went through a major website migration where we took the city's existing website. We have an entirely new platform, and this has been such a huge help for our land development team process because by far our website is our largest communication tool to all of our customers and anyone at the city trying to find information on development and construction. So right now we have a central source for land development and construction information through our construction and land development webpage. You can kind of see the path. All of this information used to be really decentralized and it was really difficult to find. We really thought about our audience and trying to not only tailor the information to the appropriate audience, but figure out how to be more task-oriented. And that was, of course, part of the larger website migration approach. But we were able to do this for our customers. And then this is an iterative process. So I think, this was our first pass at being able to do something like that. But we're really excited about the rollout. And then we'll be able to take feedback and make improvements along the way. That is all. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Kokinda. The website is a great new resource for not only community development and the land development oversight, but the city in general. There's a lot of great new information there, and it's much more easily accessible to the public. So I encourage anyone on any issue to check out the new website. So on to item B, agenda review. Are there any changes to the agenda, Mr. Isaacson?
I don't believe so, no.
I know changes there. And now on to item C, which is the minutes from now, March 16th. And to my colleague, Member Gutierrez, have you had a chance to review the minutes? And if so, can I have a motion to approve the minutes?
Motion to approve the minutes.
I will second the motion. Is there any public comment to the minutes? Not seeing any public comment, I'll close public comment. We don't need to do a roll call on this one, right?
I don't believe so since we're
all
live.
here. Yeah, we're all here, so. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Minutes are approved. And now we'll go on to public comment, and this is public comment for any items pertaining to the Land Development Oversight Committee, but not on today's agenda, but under our purview. Are there any members of the public in the audience who wish to speak today? Please come to the podium. Not seeing any, I will close general public comment, and now we'll turn it over to our presentations for the day. And we'll start with item A, Land Development Staffing Update.
Great, thank you, Committee Member Alejandro Gutierrez and Chair Friedman. I'll kick off the update here with some planning staffing updates, and as I'm reviewing this slide, I realize it's not completely current, but I'm going to actually start with the 2 positions that were recently filled. You just heard from Ms. Ellen Kokinda. We've had a vacancy in the Design Review Supervisor since Irma Unsueta retired last December. Ellen has been filling in Design Review Supervisor in an acting capacity until just recently in July she accepted the permanent position, so very happy with that. So happy to report that position's now filled. With that, though, we do have a vacancy in our planning analyst position, which Ellen previously held. We did recently fill a vacant assistant planner position in development review. Can't announce details on that at the moment, but will be filled very soon. And so what that leaves us with is still a couple vacancies. So with some promotions and staff transferring to other departments, we have actually 2 vacancies in the project planner level. One is in design review and one is in long range planning. So we're currently recruiting for both of those. And then we have 2 vacancies in the planning technician level. One is in zoning and one is in design review. And there's a couple different recruitments at the planning technician level occurring throughout the city. So hopefully we can get those 2 filled relatively soon. And that's it for planning.
Committee Member Gutierrez and Chair Friedman, for Building and Safety, we still have a number of vacancies. We currently have 2 plans examiner positions that we have open recruitments for, and a total of 4 inspection positions, some at the senior level, that we have open recruitments for, and an administrative assistant position, which has been vacant for a little over a year. And that will be recruiting for in the upcoming weeks. And I'm happy to announce, though, that we did fill our business analyst position with our very own Mark Aguilar, who has been working for the city for almost 30 years and has he is very familiar with the permitting processes across the department and with our permit tracking software. So we're very excited to have him start with us at the end of the month. And that's all for building and safety.
So that's item A before we go on to item B. So I'd like to break it up into each one. So did you have any questions about item A on the staffing? I do have just some high-level questions and just concerns I would like to raise is that's a lot of vacancies. And so can you speak to the recruitment and retention? How are we doing? Compared to other agencies, what are some of the factors in this? You mentioned that there was one vacancy that was for over a year. And just generally industry-wide, but in particular to us, what are some of the challenges that we're looking at, and how are we looking at trying to address that to be more competitive?
Well, I'm Committee Member Gutierrez, Chair Friedman. I'm happy to provide sort of my view from sort of the department director level, and what I hear sort of anecdotally from my colleagues, directors of other departments, is the challenge we're having in hiring and in terms of retention of existing employees is not unique to community development. It's an issue that's pervasive across the city. I know, Public Works is having a difficult time finding staff. I think if you look at the weekly job announcement email that comes out from HR, you'll notice nearly 75% of the postings that are currently listed are advertised as continuous. My understanding of that is because these positions are proving to be extremely difficult to fill. So there is a challenge, and I think the city's challenge as a whole. I think where you see our vacancies is particularly in building and safety. One of the reasons why we're having such a difficult time filling those roles is they are highly technical in nature, require people with a very specific skill set, and as such, we are having a difficult time finding people who are qualified for the positions, and then once they learn what the available salaries are and compare that to the well-known high cost of living in this community, we're having a very difficult time finding people who actually accept the position after it's been offered to them. And we've been in that situation a number of times across the department where we find a candidate, spend quite a bit of time and money and effort in finding a qualified and skilled candidate to fill the role, only to have them turn us down at the last minute, either because they get a more competitive offer from their current employer, or they just don't think that they can make it work financially relocating to Santa Barbara or the region. And so it's been difficult. I don't know if either of my colleagues want to add anything to that, but again, it has been difficult. I know our HR department is looking at ways to make us more competitive, but until we're able to implement some of those ideas, I think we will continue to struggle in filling vacancies such as the ones we have in building and safety.
And just to follow up on that, how is the number of vacancies impacting our service delivery in terms of some of the projects we're working on? If you could just speak to that challenge, because I know we're trying to implement a lot of changes, and then we're trying to make the process more efficient and more timely, but yet we have these vacancies for whether you're coming in through the planning side or the building and safety side. If we could speak to that.
Yeah, Chair Friedman, we have been struggling keeping our timelines, obviously, because we don't have as much staff. So we are using contract services, and we are considering doing an RFP process to look at other consultants that may have more availability, because our current consultants are also struggling to have enough staff.
And I'll add, Chair Friedman, from the planning side, when we have significant vacancies, it usually means we can't advance or take on new special projects because much of our work timelines are mandated by the State Permit Streamlining Act. And so we put available resources on our development review process and design review process, and then what we have, left over those staff can continue to work on the special projects. But that's really what suffers. And unfortunately, some of our process improvements have been lagging due to those vacancies because it's not mandated that we do that from the state, whereas other work within our division is.
So for example, the housing element, we had to put significant resources there. So some of our local service delivery projects that would be part of just what we're delivering to the public have to be delayed because those are mandated with tight timelines. You had follow-up questions, Councilmember Gutierrez?
Yes, for the staffing. Since we all know it's really expensive to live in the city of Santa Barbara, with your current staff, have you, as a director, have you developed or are you in the process of developing a plan to move your current employees in certain positions up to management, leadership levels?
Committee Member Gutierrez, Chair Friedman, that's an excellent question. The answer is yes. We are, we have promoted recently several members of staff at all levels. You heard earlier from Ms. Kokinda. She was recently promoted to supervisor. We've also promoted several other folks within the department to higher roles. And we've also moved a number of hourly employees that are sort of entering our organization through those types of positions into permanent positions at the city. And so we really are being proactive about sort of retaining folks that we are working with currently. We've brought some really talented, excellent people into the organization through those hourly roles. But there's still positions that need to be filled. And the internal promotions are fantastic, and we highly support our existing workforce moving up through the ranks. However, everyone who gets promoted creates another vacancy, right? And so that creates another position that takes time and resources to fill. And so, it's a great opportunity. We love to see our people advancing in our organization, but that also comes at a cost in terms of trying to fill vacancies.
And just one comment. So we do have the Vision 2030 and the Fiscal Sustainability Initiative that we initiated. Myself, my colleague, Councilmember Gutierrez, are on the City Finance Committee, and we're meeting on Tuesday, and actually Community Development is going to be presenting. So I think this would be good as part of the discussion to understand these challenges for the discussion on Tuesday. But in particular, what are the funding streams that are coming in to support our staff levels? And then what's the gap that we have? So there's some that are coming in through fees or fees for service, but then there's also things that we don't necessarily charge for because they're community benefited and there isn't a stream of income. So to understand what that is and where the general fund is subsidizing that and how much we're short and where we need to be in terms of compensation, and if we have some information on how competitive are we with, say, other South Coast agencies or even in Ventura where a lot of our employees live in North County, just to have that discussion on Tuesday would be helpful because we're really trying to not only improve the efficiency of our organization, but look at where are we in terms of being competitive so we can have that recruitment and retention and get to where we want to be sooner rather than later. So I'd like to have that as part of the discussion. I'm sure it was already in there, but this kind of frames it a little more for me for some of the questions that I might have on Tuesday. Anything else on this item? Great, thank you for that. Now we're on to item B.
Thank you, Chair Friedman and Committee Member Gutierrez. The next item is the Triennial Code adoption process, which is a huge work effort for building and safety. This happens once every 3 years. And we are adding a public engagement opportunity component to it. So every 3 years, the Uniform and International Construction Codes are changed and published. And then the codes are adopted by the state and by local municipalities with changes specifically to their location. So that's coming up, and we would like to engage our local stakeholders and recent applicants in an effort to be more transparent and partner with them and have them look at our existing local adopted ordinance and provide some feedback on how it's working for them, areas of struggle, and then take suggestions on what they feel would help them if we adopted it locally. So the process and timeline is next, and we have created a short survey that we will post on our website through Bang the Table, similar to the recent LDT survey. And once we get those results, we'll set up a public workshop, and that will be where we can discuss the requests in person, or not in person, but further. And then once that happens, we will evaluate and finalize our decisions on what will change to our existing local ordinance. And then the slide that's up right now just shows the timeline. So beginning next week is when we'll notice and post our survey online. And then the following week, we'll hold a public workshop. And then we'll finalize the revisions to our ordinance and bring that to Ordinance Committee on October 11th. And then there will be 2 city council meetings for introduction and adoption in November. The new code will be effective January 1st, 2023.
Great, thank you. Any questions? I think this one's pretty straightforward. I appreciate the public engagement process, and this is something, again, a mandated one that we have to do because the code's changed and we want to make sure we're up to code. So thank you for the update on that. And we'll move on to item C, Acela optimization.
Thank you, Chair Friedman, Committee Member Gutierrez. So we've had several conversations in these meetings about our planned improvements to our existing Acela permitting and land use application tracking system. We have recently put a number of resources in place as a city, both in community development, the IT department, and then through recent distribution of one-time ARPA monies to really focus in on making some significant improvements in the area of Acela optimization in this next fiscal year. And so this is an opportunity to sort of walk through both how we got here, but then what we anticipate doing over the next 6 and 12 months, and answer any questions you may have around how or why we're approaching this work and where we see the major milestones coming over the next, as I said, 6 to 12 months. So Acela Go Live, taking a look backwards, back to 2016, well before my time here at the City of Santa Barbara. The city signs a contract with Acela to replace the Tidemark Advantage permitting tracking system in June of that year. They have an implementation kickoff in October and have a planned 14-month implementation process. As is often the case, staffing issues across the organization cause delays and inevitably cause discontinuity. Fast forward to 2019, the system is finally launched in March of that year, but because of heavy workloads, limited resource availability, and the sheer complexity of the system, configuration data conversion processes lead to longer than anticipated implementation. Jumping ahead to 2020, COVID-19 accelerates the city's planned transition to digital plan submission. As you know, quickly after the pandemic hit, The city was required to transition over to digital plan review, and all planning and permit applications at that time, including resubmittals, are submitted online via the Acela Citizen Access Portal, ACA. So typically, and this has been my experience in working with other jurisdictions, it's really critical to have a solid plan in place for the post-go-live period. That includes spending time with end users, looking at what needs fixing, looking for opportunities to automate any existing processes, and really creating a roadmap for success and sustainment moving forward. Unfortunately, at the time, I just don't think the city was really in a position to, and if we go back a slide quickly, to really spend the time and dedicate the resources that were necessary to have a successful post-go-live process. What is typically done in many jurisdictions sort of making this transition to ERP platforms is you'll often have at least one business analyst assigned to the software to support the business team making that transition, and really liaising between business and technology to make sure you have the opportunities to document and train to any system configure changes you need to make. We were not resourced that way. Is my understanding that we had a very difficult time filling sort of essential IT roles around supporting Acela. And those challenges continue to create issues for us today and have prevented us from really getting our system optimized the way we want it to be. And as I tell people, you know, we are really working for Acela right now, and the goal is to get Acela working for us, and we're really an opportunity to do that now with some of the resources we've put into place. So what are we doing this year? So we are focusing on the transition to the new SaaS cloud version of Acela. The reason we are switching to the latest technology is Acela no longer provides maintenance or bug fixes for the version we're on. So that challenges us in a number of ways, one of them being that we sort of don't get the Acela's, let's say, A team when we have issues, because those folks are focused on the current version of Acela. And so we sort of get a lower level and lower quality of support because we're on this old version. The migration, another benefit of the migration is that we will never have to pay for upgrades again, and the upgrades happen automatically. So we will always be on the quote-unquote current version. And then, as we'll see in a second, this latest version also has many enhanced ACA portal tools that will benefit our customers as they sort of engage with the process and want to understand where their applications are in the review and issuing process. So as I mentioned a second ago, this is what we can expect in terms of some of the new interface tools that we'll be getting with the latest version of ACA. Better look and feel, better functionality, and much better reporting and dashboard tools for our stakeholders and customers. Other benefits include, and this is sort of in the weeds a bit, but single sign-on for back office users, that's staff, highest levels of security and uptime with the support of Microsoft Azure, and access to Acela Insights, which is a built-in analytics and dashboard tool that we can use behind the scenes. So as I mentioned, one of the reasons we are really excited about where we are headed this fiscal year in terms of our Acela improvement plan is new resources. So joining us, just walking in, just in the nick of time, is Rudy Fiddler from our IT department. But we've hired an Acela IT analyst, and we, if it hasn't happened already, these slides are a little bit out of date, but the goal is to have that individual stationed over here at 630 Garden Street to have ready access to our LDT staff. We have created and now filled the business analyst position in building and safety. That gentleman is sitting in the back of the room, Mr. Mark Aguilar. And it's important to note that, you know, that role is slightly different, but is in many ways similar to the role of the planning analyst that was created in the planning division. So there's a strong relationship and correlation there. And we hope that by having a business analyst in the building and safety division, we can really bridge that gap and avoid what we call sort of some of the upstairs, downstairs issues over here in community development, so that we really have a strong level of coordination and continuity between our planning functions and our building and safety permitting functions. And by having an analyst in both divisions, we really hope that we can sort of work through some of those divides and really strengthen and integrate both processes, so that to our customers who we're working with, we are one department, not a series of divisions. And that's a really important goal for us moving forward. I also mentioned that we received $250,000 in ARPA funds. 50,000 of that or so will go towards supporting the cloud upgrade and migration that I spoke about a second ago. The remainder of which will be available for contract support to work with both our IT analyst and our building and safety business analyst to really make a tremendous amount of progress early on over this year and probably into the next year, supporting our in-house work efforts. So what will the business analysts help us with? Well, specifically, they will be tasked with coordinating business and technology. That's the traditional role of folks in that position. What does that mean? You know, if you've been in some of these somewhat frustrating conversations with some of our contract support, you know, we'll ask what we can do, and oftentimes the response is, well, what do you want to do? And then we both ask that question to each other 5 or 6 times, and then the meeting's over. So what we're really trying to do is get past that and to really understand the coordination between business and technology. And so having someone in this role that has a deep understanding both of our planning processes, but also has worked through you know, supporting the department through the business liaison role, really helping people navigate our permitting processes. We really think that we can now have that perspective guiding how we optimize our system and where we focus our work efforts over this next year, and making our system and our processes more customer effective and more user friendly. And so that involves in prioritizing these improvements, really to achieve these system-wide efficiencies. I had a conversation, excuse me, with the counselor recently, asking, you know, what are we doing? How are we approaching these challenges when they get a call from a constituent? Are we just dealing with things on a permit-by-permit basis, or are we really addressing these snags systematically? And this is, you know, we are treating them systematically, but this is an opportunity to really look system-wide in how we achieve these efficiencies. Another area where we have room for improvement is in reporting. And this better reporting will allow us to make better data-driven decisions. And then where we sort of have a gap right now is around the change implementation and training. So when you make a change to the system, you need to document it. You need to document your existing process. You need to document your sort of future state, your optimal state condition, and then you need to train staff across the LDT, so that goes beyond just community development, to really know how to take advantage of the new processes, new workflows, and make sure everybody's on the same page in terms of how we want to use our systems to be effective. So in terms of progress and updates, as I mentioned, we are currently in the process of making the cloud migration. That should extend into the 4th quarter of this year. Towards the end of that process, we'll need to do user acceptance training. And that's, you know, we'll create a test environment, and staff will be in there, frankly, trying to break the system to find out where the weaknesses are and get a production environment that we can use and be successful with. While that's happening, our new business analyst will really be doing a robust assessment of our existing configuration to find out where to focus improvement efforts over the next year. We plan to cut over to this new system and provide the new external customer interface at the end of this year, first thing next year. And we want to come back to you guys with an update in the 1st quarter of 2023 to provide, information on where we are in this overall process, but to also give a short demo of some of these improved customer tools and talk about our specific area of focus to respond to recurrent issues in the systematic fashion that I described. And with that, I will take any questions.
Any questions, comments? I just, you basically answered my question to the presentation, but in the past, we had staffing shortages, which led to the ongoing challenges of implementation and then working with the public. But it seems that we have a dedicated staff plus the additional ARPA funding. I just want to make sure I understand this additional ARPA funding that is going to get support directly from Acela staff. Is that correct, or what's the additional support into the staff that we have?
Committee Member Gutierrez, Chair Friedman, the additional roughly $200,000 in ARPA funds, I don't believe have made a firm decision on how that will be used. I think we are envisioning that money will go towards contract support. It's unclear at this time if that contract support will come directly from Acela or come from a third-party vendor that has experience working with other jurisdictions in a similar position that we are in sort of working in as sort of one leg of a multi-leg stool, kind of working with internal staff, working with the technology vendor, and working with customers to really identify where the issues are and making those system configurations behind the scenes to make everything run a little bit smoother. Currently, we're working with an outfit called Gray Quarter. We may continue to work with them, or we may explore options with other vendors. We really haven't made a decision on that at this point.
So there's additional staffing support outside of our own that's going to have the expertise that we wouldn't have in-house.
Correct.
To help make this transition. And then you mentioned that going to the cloud, which we're doing now, will improve our service delivery and reduce costs because we won't have to pay for upgrades. And then do you expect some of that to translate into immediate efficiencies and understanding? Is it an easier system to use now, or is it still as complex? And what's the learning curve that we have? And the reason I'm getting to this is it's a question that's come up at council and it comes up in the community is we've made all these investments over time. Now we're making another investment. Is there a point at which we should look at another system, or is it at this point we feel like we're in a good place, that we have the staffing and we've made the investment and to keep going? Because I think this came up at the council during the budget about whether we should look at another system completely.
Committee Member Gutierrez, Chair Friedman, I don't recommend switching to a different system at this point. I think the additional investments we are poised to make aren't anything that shouldn't have been anticipated when the decision to go this route was made however many years ago. Pretty standard. We upgrade Acela just like we need to upgrade to Office 365, which we did recently as a city, right? Upgrades are not unusual. I think a lot has been invested in Acela. I think the challenges we are having now with the system are not so much a criticism of Acela, but more a representative of where we have been able or unable to really support the continual optimization of the system from a internal staffing standpoint. And so I think to sort of make an evaluation now on the successfulness of Acela and its ability to serve our needs would be unfair, frankly. I think, we'll have a much better understanding of its capability and how well suited it is to the operations we have across the land development team in a few years after we've been able to really do some of this work that we really are excited and eager to do this year and into coming fiscal years.
I appreciate that answer because I know there would be significant investment with going to a new system, but with this, it shows that we planned ahead and we've had lessons learned from the past experience of upgrading it, and that we've taken those lessons and said, here's where strategically with more staffing and more support to get us to where we want to be, including the new upgrades to the system. And so we're using those challenges that we had and trying to correct them to get to where we want to go. and that we are on a good path. So from what you said today, I feel more confident than I have in the past about where we're going and the opportunities that are there. So I appreciate that answer. So anything else on it, Estella?
If I may, Chair Friedman and Councilmember Gutierrez, just to recognize that with this upgrade, that there will be immediate communication benefits from our external, or from our customers. And I know that Mr. Isaacson pointed that out, but the functionality with the LDT survey that we did back in September that this group, the subcommittee, oversaw, that we received direct feedback and will be able to address a lot of those comments that we heard from our applicants and the challenges that they deal with now, that the current system it just is a little bit insufficient to meet and to be as visually and as easy to navigate, I should say.
Great, thank you for that. That's important that we're also, not just from our side, but from the public side that we interface with it, there'll be benefits as well to going with these upgrades. So with that, we'll move on to item D, and then after the presentation, I'll open up for public comment after all of these are on there. So item D, Single Family Design Board work effort.
Okay, again, Ellen Kokinda, I'm the design review supervisor. I wanted to talk to you all today about the Single Family Design Board work effort. As you may recall, one of the NOVAC group report recommendations, number 26, was to eliminate the Single Family Design Board, SFDB, or reassign its duties in order to streamline and simplify the land development process. That is something that, again, it's been on the table for several years now, but we want to discuss a focused work effort today and looking for staff to assess the current SFDB purview and consider reducing the triggers for single unit housing projects that are subject to discretionary review. So some of the goals of this focused work effort, one is that in looking at reducing the number of design review triggers, we want to maintain a value-added process for single-unit projects. What that means is we have the Single Family Design Board is just extremely committed to making sure that by the time a project gets through and gets all of their discretionary approvals or their design review approvals, that project looks better and is more compatible with the neighborhood than it was when it started. So we have a really dedicated board looking at that. In any effort related to this, we want to make sure that we still maintain that value system of having excellent design in Santa Barbara, because that's really the expectation. Secondly, we want to reduce the number of overall projects reviewed at a public hearing, and that's really just to streamline efforts. The Single Family Design Board is a little bit unique in that it receives twice as many projects as ABR and HLC, which is pretty extreme. I mean, we have a very high volume of development projects coming through the city, and Single Family Design Board is very much subject to just having an incredibly high workload to go through. And then lastly, as part of this, we want to look at expanding opportunities for administrative review. So right now we have our single family design guidelines, and they're posted online. We have them in book. It's an effort that identifies all the items that staff can review without a public hearing. But the last time that this was updated was in 2012, and we believe that there are more opportunities to expand staff level review that could, again, reduce the number of projects that go to the Single Family Design Board at a public hearing. Just a little bit of background, the Neighborhood Preservation Ordinance, which was adopted in 1992, really was the start of looking at single-family residential units, and with the creation of the single-family design guidelines. It started as being able to create a discretionary review process for homes in the Hillside, as well as any kind of infill development. So prior to that, single unit residences were not subject to discretionary review. When this was developed, the Architectural Board of Review, or ABR, it fell under ABR's purview to review these types of projects. And over time, that really created a huge caseload for ABR to review that. And we saw that from the early 2000s, there were a lot of McMansions being built on Shoreline Drive, and there was this massive 3-year process to update the Neighborhood Preservation Ordinance, which was finally, the Single Family Design Board was created in 2007. And it was really to try to address some of these larger issues and concerns about design and neighborhood compatibility and what's appropriate in terms of single unit development. So you can see that the ABR was meeting on an every Monday basis, and that was yet another reason to create the Single Family Design Board, is to be able to offload some of those projects. And so this is kind of the basic history of how things evolved. So this isn't a comprehensive list, but we do have a number of triggers of projects that are subject to single-family design board review. Probably the most prominent one to note is this first bullet point, is the Hillside Design District. If a project is in the Hillside Design District and it has one of the following, either a 20% or plus lot slope, or they're changing their roof material, or if there's 50 plus cubic yards of grading, that will trigger design review at SFDB. And part of this, again, is to place a little bit more emphasis over things that might be seen from the hillside. They tend to be much more visible, in trying to create a process to review those projects. I'm not necessarily going to go through the whole list, but I just want to acknowledge that when the Neighborhood Preservation Ordinance was updated, there was a set list of things that the SFDB reviewed. That list has grown, similar to how ABR first took on single unit residences. SFDB, their list continues to grow with what triggers design review. So when we updated to Title 30 zoning ordinance back in 2018, we added minor zoning exceptions. All of those projects used to have to go to the staff hearing officer, which is for modifications. That was a much more expensive process. And we realized maybe they're not that controversial. So it's something more design related. So we think that it's most appropriate for this, the Single Family Design Board or our design boards to review. So that has been added. And then similarly, ADUs that do not meet the ministerial design criteria. And we have, quite frankly, we have a ton of ADUs, but we also have a high volume that do not meet the ministerial design criteria and therefore are subject to discretionary review. So in terms of this work effort and what we're talking about, we are looking at reviewing the current triggers for SFDB review, not only to do that internally to really understand what are we looking at. We have project data. We want to look at project data and outcomes. So we have 3 years worth of data that we are able to pull from Acela, which is really fortunate, and to be able to understand what are all the design review triggers that each of these development projects like what they tripped, and then what were the outcomes of some of these decisions at the design review or at SFDB to see, okay, are there things that are on this list that may or may not be controversial that we think deserves a public hearing, or there are things that somehow always seem to get approved. And then naturally, to be part of this is stakeholder outreach. So there's both an internal process, and almost everything we do, there's going to be an internal process because we have a lot of people who have been staff design review boards and staff the SFDB, where there's that incredible expertise. But then I just want to point out that we have Chair Brian Miller from the SFDB here today in the audience. So part of the stakeholder outreach is to ask the SFDB themselves, as well as our applicant and our architect and development community, because they have yet different lens of the projects they either bring before the board that they think, wow, this really didn't necessarily need a public hearing, but then again to hear from the SFDB themselves to see, wow, I think that we could be a little bit more. I think here are the most important things that come to our desk. So this is really, I just want to point out that back in 2007, or leading up to the Neighborhood Preservation Ordinance updates of that time, that was a 3-year work effort. We're not anticipating that. We really wanted this to be focused. We're looking at an 8 to 10 month timeline for this. It is part of, again, the Novak report recommendations and how we can do something. And we're dealing with things because it's a huge staff effort to process that many applications. So again, if there's a way to expand our staff approvals and just reduce the number of projects, we want to make it the most meaningful, and again, to bring that value, to make sure that the value's added at the end. And I'm sure, I'm guessing you've heard from many constituents over time that have been subject to any kind of design review. Sometimes they feel like it can be difficult, and especially for single unit residences, just homeowners who, they're going to come maybe one time in their lives, or, they have one big addition. So we want to make sure that, that they have a good process, and we're quite conscious of customer service in that regard. A parallel thing, a track conversation that I want to have today with you is SFDB membership. And specifically, we are dealing with some challenges regarding member recruitment and retention. I want to point out that Chair Miller here, actually his term was up in June, and he graciously agreed to stay on through December of this year, and that's not something that we necessarily like. I mean, he's served on the board for almost a decade, I want to say. So we've had, say again? 2010. So yes, so over a decade. And again, we're really struggling to get recruitment, and that's not because we haven't made efforts to reach out directly to people to say you would be a great candidate. We always want people to submit applications for advisory board appointments, and we try to be really considerate. And we recognize it takes a considerable amount of time, and that's really difficult for a lot of professionals. So we have a recruitment issue, and then retention. If you may or may not be aware, but ever so recently we had a board member step down on the SFDB who had just been appointed this January, and that was due to time constraints. So I think, once you get into the spot, it can be a little bit difficult to stay when realizing, wow, this is an incredible, it's a time commitment. And similarly, we're dealing with quorum issues. So the SFDB meets every other Monday. And recently, we are now down to 5 board members. We had one new board member, Laura Lee Anderson, who just joined. So we're very thankful about that. But we had one step down, so we're kind of at we're at 5 of 7 members. And medium quorum is 4 members. So that means if someone has to step down for a conflict of interest, we automatically lose quorum. That actually happened this past week. It's really problematic when we agendize an item, we send a public notice, we don't know that day. I mean, with COVID, anybody could be out at any moment, and it's really difficult to say, well, okay, now we're going to have to push your project back, and we are scheduled out at least 2 months for SFDB. So that means if someone even wants to get on for a concept review or just an initial review of their project, they're going to have to wait several months to do so. And again, you can imagine if you're a homeowner and you're just trying to get your project done, that's really not great customer service or what we want to provide. And that's certainly not the case for HLC and ABR. It's really, right now, it's very much specific to SFDB. So we're dealing with meeting quorum issues and just getting the appropriate number of board members to be at the table. But then there's also qualification requirements that in order to meet quorum, you have to have certain qualifications. And as you're aware, when you pick out the advisory board members and appoint them, they're asking for very specific roles on a board. So we're conscious of that, and I'll move on to the next slide in just a moment. There's also challenges for in-person requirement. I know that right now we're subject to the Brown Act, but there's the consent calendar, which is just 2 board members, 2 SFDB board members that meet on every Monday. So there's that level of commitment there, and to see are there any opportunities with that. And then naturally, I just want to point out that because of such a high volume of projects going before the single family design board, that they haven't had as much board member training because it's really hard to take time away to really train them up and to get them settled when we're kind of trying to push development projects on the table. So just as a reminder, here's the makeup of the single-family design board. It's 7 members. They have to be residents of Santa Barbara County. The qualifications that we need 2 licensed architects, 1 licensed landscape architect, and then 3 persons with professional qualifications and 1 public at large. Right now, we only have 1 licensed architect and 1 landscape architect, and the rest are, we have 3 others with professional qualifications. So again, when you look at the quorum requirements, we struggle to meet this on an every week basis, which gives staff a little bit of anxiety, and it's, yeah, we just don't know what's going to happen every day. So for your consideration today and input, we want to look at doing some fast tracking ordinance amendments. So one is just to reduce the number of board members overall. And I'm not suggesting a specific number at this moment, but then also reduce the quorum requirements so that if our current membership is 7 and we have 4 as quorum, what if we went from 5 into a quorum of 3? That could help significantly just with dealing with our weekly anxieties. And then also modifying the board member qualification requirements so that we could be a little bit more fluid and flexible and that we're not needing one specific board member to show up in order to review a project. So this is really fast tracking. The ordinance changes would happen under Title 22, which is not subject to the Planning Commission. So that process is naturally, we would do any kind of, we could make those changes, it would go to Ordinance Committee and then to Council for a vote. So we just have some basic questions for you related to all of these. I just want to pretty much gauge from you whether or not you agree with the outlined goals of the larger single-family design board work effort to, again, reduce the number of triggers that require projects to go to discretionary design review, and then expand administrative approvals at the staff level, and whether or not you agree with fast tracking the membership ordinance amendments, which we'd love to get your input on if there's something from your perspective. And then naturally for the larger review and outreach effort, if you have any specific considerations or requests.
Great, thank you for the presentation. A lot to unpack here. I'll go ahead and start off on this and then open up for questions. So if you could go back to slide, I think it's 32. I just want to understand what constitutes a quorum. That's listed all the qualifications, but do you need one what is it? Because you mentioned if the licensed architect, we only have 1. If that person's not there, then can you still have a quorum? Or if the landscape architect isn't there, can you still have a quorum? Just wondering.
There needs to be a licensed architect at the meeting, and we've struggled to meet that in many instances.
So that's a huge issue then. Mm-hmm. And then,
if I made Chair Friedman and Councilmember Gutierrez, just one of the other things about recruitment that I failed to mention earlier, and I just want to point out, and this came up in my efforts to recruit and get people to apply to the advisory boards, that one person said, you know, there's a problem, there's a challenge, because within Santa Barbara County, we have the City of Goleta design review boards. We have 4 design review boards here in the city. The county itself has a design review board. North County has design review boards. So we're trying to pull licensed architects from that pool, and it's already those. There are lots of positions that everyone's looking for, and you know how it is, public service. There's with the time, and it's not for everybody. It's not everybody's cup of tea, or to kind of get involved. I think it's helpful to have initial connections to be able to break into that world. So I think that it becomes very difficult, and ABR and HLC maybe not as much because of the scale of the projects, that those seem to be more of the where there's higher demand, and that contributes to the challenge with SFDB.
Good point, and good point about the others of the county. I know they have the South County ABR, the Montecito ABR, or they call them BAR there, but and others. So along this, with the quorum issues, and then you mentioned that it schedules 2 months out because of the high volume of projects that are before there. If we were to streamline and have a way that certain projects came on, but some now would fall off, they would go to the administrative review. Would in theory, one of the goals is that would reduce the 2-month wait to get on there? Is that where we're going? One of the efficiencies that we're trying to find?
Absolutely. So, Chair Friedman, Councilmember Gutierrez, we don't like to schedule that far out in advance. I mean, it's nice to be able to get people on 1 or 2 meetings, just so they can, again, it helps them with their development process and kind of help figuring out their own personal timelines in addition to having to go through design review. Some of these projects are waiting to get to the Planning Commission or the staff hearing officer. So that also is problematic because it means that they have to get it just takes longer in those instances. So sometimes, some things, I think we could be a little bit open-minded about the fluidity of where projects go. Some projects, maybe they're not full board projects. Maybe they bump down to a consent calendar. And then some consent calendar items would then be bumped down to an administrative approval. And right now, the challenge with, we have all of our administrative design standards here of what staff can approve, but because they haven't been updated, sometimes there's just one word missing that it's like, well, if it just said this, then I wouldn't have to take it to a public hearing. So we want to identify a lot of those items that maybe with certain materials or things that are just, again, not controversial, something that would make it a lot easier. Because there are so many times where it pains me to send something, it pains me to send a homeowner to a public hearing that where I'm thinking, wow, this really should be an administrative approval.
That's helpful because I think where it goes is also the issue of the thresholds for the triggers, and how are you going to work to identify what those thresholds are? Because going back to the early 2000s, you had these large projects that were coming in that necessitated having some type of review, but then there's very minor things that you just mentioned that have now fallen under the purview. So how is that process going to play out in terms of what would go just for administrative review or on consent versus something larger?
So Chair Friedman, Councilmember Gutierrez, that would be part of our stakeholder outreach process. So internal conversations, again, we have many people have staffed the design review boards. They have personal insights when their project is subject to review. Again, the things that were super easy to approve or the things where people get caught up in, or the things that bring people out and bring out a lot of neighborhood participation. I don't think we're necessarily suggesting, I think that we're not trying to alter the entire purpose of the SFDB, and I think a lot of the work that was done in 2007, where the mass, bulk, and scale to make infill development really appropriate, to make sure that that neighborhood compatibility is met. We don't want to McMansionize everything and Shoreline Drive and these different projects. I think we're trying to maintain. I think it's a reasonable thing of what you look at of, would your neighbor have major concerns if with a particular project? I mean, it's kind of just a simplification of reviewing an application, but it's like, is this going to be problematic? Is this going to cause privacy issues? Is this going to cause noise issues? Is this so massive that you're like, hey, I wouldn't want this next door? So I think that there's like a reasonable test, but certainly leveraging our internal staff experience, and then again, relying on our single-family design board and architects and development community to also be able to provide anecdotes and examples. And as I mentioned, we do have 3 years worth of data to identify all of the projects that were subject to SFDB review and what were those triggers. So even, for example, the Hillside Design District, that's a really large swath across the city. And if you have 20% slope, we could just start to look at some of those things and then be able to flag, is this appropriate, and how we might just reduce the scale that way as well.
Well, I think it's good for any organization when you have something that's 15 years old to reevaluate it. And it's just healthy for the organization as a whole and the public service that we're trying to deliver, because things have changed since 2007, obviously. And so just to take a look at it, and if you end up right where you are, great, at least you looked at it, but I'm confident there'll be some changes we could make. I'm supportive of the effort of doing this and fast tracking it. And then in terms of reducing the number of board members, I think that would be helpful in terms of meeting a quorum and looking at that. But again, I think public input should also address that as well. And then the other issue that I had one other thing I was gonna outline, but it was in terms of the public outreach. I like the architects and planners in the single family design board. Also, former members should be included as well. I think that they're not on there now, but they may have served for a number of years and would have some insights on there. And then in terms of specific areas in the community, if you were to look at, I would guess that if you looked at the agendas or just look at the history, there are probably some areas of town that have more projects that are coming in than other areas of town that would fit under it, and might even have homeowners associations or other groups that are really engaged. So that might be where you would get some input from the public that would be enhanced, like, for example, the Upper East Side, they're very engaged in their community. So if there are individuals, organizations in there that would want to, or the Mesa, and then there's Riviera, but there's also on the east side and west side, there's going to be certain criteria that we're going to meet, and there's organizations in there. So wherever there's homeowner groups that you've seen through your agendas that have participated, not homeowners groups, but the public groups that have participated, would be helpful just to look that over, and you'll get a good sense of which communities are participating in this and get feedback from them. So, but I'm supportive of this. It's one of the recommendations from NOVAC, and I just think that the service of, if we don't have a quorum because someone's absent, like our architect, and you have to wait 2 more months to get on, and then you have to go to the planning commission or something, that's delaying you getting on there, because then it's a wait. So I'm pleased to move this forward. So Member Gutierrez, do you have any comments, questions?
I just really like the idea of fast tracking some of those projects and maybe modifying the membership ordinance. I think that's, and thank you, Chair Friedman, to bringing in the public also to engage in that.
Great.
That's
So I'm going to open it up to public comment for any of these items, if there is any member of the public that wishes to speak. Come on up to the mic, and I do want to thank you, Chair Miller, for extending your service through the end of the year for us. So it's a big step, but I appreciate it. So come on, if you could state your name for the record.
Sure, I'm Brian Miller, and yeah, I'm the chair of the Single Family Design Board. I've been on the board since 2010, and I have to say it's been a great experience. It's an honor, actually. This is an amazing community, and a couple of things I can say from my experience of being on the board is, yes, it's about architectural review and applying to the design guidelines, but on the NOVAC report, it says eliminating the SFDB, but one of the critical things that the SFDB does, and I think this is also important about the difference between residential and commercial, is residential is very personal. When someone comes in and builds their home, they're very emotionally attached to that particular house. And so there's a lot of emotions involved in the approval process. And one of the triggers is that neighbors are notified that someone next door or across the street is changing their home, and they have an opportunity to come in and get feedback. And what I've discovered from that is that they get to know their neighbors, and suddenly people are realizing who they have in the neighborhood, and they're a little more conscious of who's around them. And in particular, the last project we had, people brought in this home they want to build. There's a neighbor next door that's very upset about it, and I said, you two need to get together and talk and develop a relationship. And I think that's one of the positives about the board, is that it creates community. I grew up in Santa Maria, and the politics up there is very different. It's not about community, it's about development. and to get out of the way and let whatever developers want to do, they have the control. And as a consequence, you have the type of community you have in Santa Maria. Whereas in Santa Barbara, it's a very different personality. And I bring this up too because we're kind of caught in a perfect storm here, because you have these ADU ordinance coming in from California, and there's an added pressure to get those approved. And they're trying to bypass the design review processes, and they're applying the same level of standards that Santa Maria has to Santa Barbara, which you really can't do, because you have to really figure out the personalities of these different communities. So we have that going on. And then, the rules keep changing, and then it just puts more pressure on the building departments. And I see a lot of people in our building department leave. They retire, they transfer. Some of my favorite plan checkers are gone. They've been taken by headhunters, or they retired. I know that's been going on. So there's all this stuff that's happening. And I think Ellen has made an outstanding, excellent report, and I think you've got a really good handle of what's going on. And so I'm very confident that you guys figure this out. But I'm not licensed, but I've been practicing architecture for over 35 years, and I've been meaning to get my license, but I never got around to it. But that doesn't mean I'm not a bad or unqualified. But that's a valid point when you talk about, do we have to have a licensed architect to complete the quorum? It might meet some other criteria, like how long have they been involved in the board, or how long have they been, how familiar are they? If they, like I would say, because I've been on the board for as long as I have, maybe having the license doesn't matter. So there's, criteria there to look at in terms of what they really know and what they can understand in terms of reviewing projects. And I believe that's all I need to say. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair Miller. Those very salient and great comments. I appreciate you coming today. And I wanted to add, you maybe think of a couple additional items, is it needs to be clearly communicated as we move this process forward that it's not to remove the single-family design board. I think when the recommendation came out from Novak, that was in there, and it created a lot of backlash right up front. So I think that's the first thing I think we need to do is what is it we're going to achieve here, and why do we want to do it, and what are we not doing? Because I think that's probably still out there. And if we refer to the Novak report and people go and read the Novak report and it says eliminate it, that's immediately where people are going to jump. So we need to really articulate that from the start. I think that's the first thing we need to do. And then I like the point you made about requirements for what the membership requirements are versus the quorum requirements, and looking at specifically those two, because we probably should still continue to have a licensed architect as a requirement, at least if we go down to 5, at least 1. But then in your case, you've been on there since 2010, you're not licensed, but yeah, you could fit the bill for somebody who's been on there, you've reviewed so many projects. So maybe looking at the quorum requirements specifically, in addition to the membership requirements, and trying to find something that can meet there. And then the other thing that from your comments came up is, I'm not sure what it is now, but when we have these state mandates such as ADUs or other things that are coming through, and they're basically state mandates, so they need to get approved, do they come to the single family design board? And if so, what is the value of having the single family design board, unless it's just basically a rubber stamp if they're mandated? So checking it when we're looking at the thresholds, looking at what are state mandates, and are there some that are state mandated that we just need to, that could be done administratively for that instead of coming to us. And I think that would be important too.
And Chair Friedman and Councilmember Gutierrez, if I could just clarify that as part of the accessory dwelling unit ordinance, we have ministerial design criteria. So that's staff approval of like a whole checklist that applicants have to fill out, that staff review, that they bypass the discretionary review process. So they would never even have to go to SFDB, and in certain instances, the Historic Landmarks Commission. It's only when they don't meet the ministerial criteria, that's when they're subject to single family design board, or again, HLC. And so I think it gives, I think we couldn't consider everything in developing the accessory dwelling unit ordinance, and that some people want to have design license to come in with different things and for the board's consideration, and they're not scared to do that, or they might have certain site constraints that may make it difficult. So I just wanted to clarify that, and it's not every project.
Thank you for the clarification. And anything else? Any other members of the public? Not seeing, I'll close public comment. And any other comments from my colleagues? That's it. So with that, I'll close this item. And before we adjourn, Mr. Isaacson, we had talked about how we want to schedule the next meetings rather than quarterly. So if you could give us some options here on a recommendation on when our next meeting should be and what we're looking at. So.
Thank you, Chair Friedman. It's our recommendation that because the nature of the projects that we've discussed today are a little more complicated, a little more time intensive, and will require us some room to make some meaningful progress. It's our recommendation that we come back to you on a biannual basis. So that would, be sometime in early 2023 to provide both an update on the progress we've made on both the projects we've highlighted today, as well as talk about any future and pending work efforts we have for the remainder of the fiscal year.
I'm supportive of that. So approximately every 6 months at this point. My colleague is nodding, so.
Yes, I'm supportive.
Great. So we'll schedule sometime tentative January, February to come back so we can see some progress on these efforts. So with that, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you.